Forget all you know about podcasts. We welcome you to an experience uniquely different. Please join us for our coverage of all entertainment on the fringe of society. The candles are lit, the lights are down low. It is now time to welcome our host as he steps up to the pulpit. The sacrifice has been prepared for the midnight black mass.
Ghastly greetings, groovy ghoulies, and welcome to this week's edition of the Midnight Black Mass podcast. I am your host, the maniacal minister of the occult, the devil you know, the Rev Dan Wilson, here by myself once again, as Andrew Alexander, our esteemed co-host, is still out on the mend with that jaw wired shut, and is healing, so still able to communicate, certainly working with me at Empire Wrestling in terms of my new role as the commissioner and matchmaker there. A little more to come on that here later in the program. Going to give you a nice recap of the Battle Bowl event, which was the first event under my leadership there, and happy to report that it went off well. But hope you've been well. Last week was an episode with another one of our In the Can segments. We still have a few more of those before they'll expire, and hopefully Andrew will be back and recovered from his injury. But if not, we have contingency plans in place. Do not fear. But regardless of that, last week we talked about playing favorites, another volume of our countdown series, and we discussed our favorite feuds and angles, and there was a lot of fun and got some nice feedback off of it. And we always encourage you to submit your feedback to us as well in terms of, these lists are just our favorite, just things that we enjoyed. Feel free to make your own list and share it with us. And we're happy to share the fan feedback as well on the Midnight Black Mass podcast here, because after all, you are part of the congregation. So this week, we're going back to the playing favorites bin. It was actually, interestingly enough, when we recorded the last edition of that, it spawned discussion. So the very next one we recorded we talked about the best angles. Now we're going to look at some of the worst. Tonight, we're going to talk about pro wrestling duds. That's right. Some of the things, whether it be stars or a particular run a guy had, or a particular angle or a feud that maybe had a lot of hype or expectation and failed necessarily to deliver on that. So very awesome discussion. It was a lot of fun, and that will be our featured segment tonight on the program. Let's talk about the wrestle news real quick, though. Not a lot going on in wrestling this week other than all eyes and ears still focused on the rumors of AJ Styles and the Bullet Club, along with Shinsuke Nakamura debuting in the WWE. And there's recent video posted where AJ definitely hints that may be the case. So a lot of people are really excited about that. I hope that if he's in it, it makes a big impact. Preferred that maybe he wins it. I think that WWE is looking to shake things up, so we could see something quite surprising here with the potential and rumored debut of AJ Styles and the Bullet Club. And so hopefully we'll have a little more news on that this week. But if you don't get it here, keep your eyes peeled to any wrestling website, and they'll certainly let you know what's going on. But the Royal Rumble coming up on January the 24th. And always one of my favorite events that they do. I haven't followed a lot of Raw and stuff lately. It kind of goes on the back burner when new television shows and things come on. Not that I don't enjoy it sometimes, but, just like I said before on the show, wrestling is work at this point. And not that I don't enjoy the work. I absolutely love it, but it is also work. So when I'm on my leisure time, sometimes I just don't like to mix the two. Sometimes I don't like to watch wrestling for leisure. And sometimes I do. It depends on what kind of mood I'm in. The Royal Rumble's always one I tune into. It's always a lot of fun. It's a unique match, unique gimmick. Pat Patterson, the great booker, the originator of the concept, and also the guy that really, he was just a master at putting it together. My favorite Rumble, if you go back, is of course many people's favorite Rumble. It's the 1992 Royal Rumble where Ric Flair goes the distance and wins the WWF World Title. And it's a masterpiece of booking and a masterpiece of a match with just more legends than you can shake a stick at appearing in one ring. If you have the WWE Network, definitely go check out the 92 Royal Rumble. If you're not familiar with that match, it exemplifies everything right with that match that you can do, because the Battle Royal, as a guy who's been in charge of making matches, as a guy who's known many people and been on hundreds, if not thousands, of independent shows over the last 16, going on 17 years now, a Battle Royal is often a match that's just thrown out there for no rhyme or reason. You got a bunch of extra guys that showed up. Let's have a Battle Royal. I hate when that happens. I try to avoid that at all costs, but certainly I've been in scenarios where that's happened. So, it's great to see that they can take that match, make it something special still, make it mean something. The bit about having people come in every 2 minutes, or, they sometimes switch up the timing between the intervals, like 90 seconds or a minute. But the classic formula is every 2 minutes. It allows for building and storytelling. And if you're smart, you can do a lot of things in that match. And so looking forward to that coming up. And I just talked about Battle Bowl 2016, the Empire Wrestling Extravaganza that took place at the Empire Arena last night in Rossville, Georgia, as we record and air this on the initial live broadcast on BeyondRingside.com. It went off without a hitch, actually, and I was very pleased to report. I certainly had some butterflies about that, because I hadn't been in a matchmaking role in quite a while. I was content to do the announcing thing, it's kind of light duty for me, and enjoyed it. But so now the matchmaking thing comes about, and I get to take it, and I get to worry about dealing with all these yahoos in a wrestling locker room, which is always a lot of fun. You're part babysitter and part zookeeper, so it's quite an experience. But regardless, of course, congratulations first off to the 7-figure deal Ace Rockwell, who's on a comeback trail at the Empire Arena, who won the Battle Bowl Battle Royal. Of course, if you're not familiar with the Battle Bowl concept, and what we used it to do is determine a number one contender to the Empire Heavyweight Championship. But the concept would be, in this case, we had 20 men. You put all the names in a bucket and a hat and a bowl. We had a nice lottery-style bowl in the vein of the Powerball, with the various little ping pong balls with the names of the participants. And so we would draw at random names out of the bucket. And so you would have, it could be best of friends, could be worst of enemies, ending up as partners, as opponents, all sorts of interesting combinations. But you would split all of those participants into a series of tag team matches. The winners of the tag team matches would go on to a battle royal later in the night. And the winner of the battle royal is the king of Battle Bowl. And that, for 2016, would be Ace Rockwell. And Ace will take that and go on to Long Cold Winter on February the 6th, 2016 at the Empire Arena, 22 Austin Avenue, Rossville, Georgia. And he will take on the Empire Heavyweight Champion Bobby Hayes in what is sure to be a knockdown, drag-out affair. You have two veteran talents, two guys who really know the squared circle inside and out and are very familiar with each other as people, but not so much as competitors. So that's a very interesting dichotomy. I think the people are going to be firmly behind Ace, but Bobby Hayes certainly has his supporters. He's traditionally a rule breaker, as the old PWI magazines would call him. He's a guy that, in most cases, not on the side of the fans, but due to his time and tenure there and his just tenacity and his, he's Bobby Hayes. He makes no bones about who he is. He's not a happy-go-lucky dude. He's nasty. He's mean. He likes to fight. He likes to get paid, and he likes to get out of the building. And the people have grown to kind of respect him for that. But Ace Rockwell is a longtime fan favorite. They've been with him through the ups and the downs. They watched all of the tragedy with his blinding incident and how he rebounded from that. And they have the real emotional connection to Ace. So that's going to be a barn burner. Really excited about that. Long Cold Winter already shaping up to be a great event. Also, we announced another big match for Long Cold Winter at the Battle Bowl. The Empire Junior Heavyweight Championship has been vacant for some time. One of Andrew Alexander's final acts as commissioner was to strip Ryan Vega of the title for actions unbecoming of a champion, just putting his hands on officials, refusing to show up and defend the title. There were several strikes against him. Andrew had enough, and he finally took the belt away. The belt has been vacant since then. So at Long Cold Winter on February 6th, we are going to crown an Empire Junior Heavyweight Champion in an 8-man ladder match. All hell is going to break loose that night. And hopefully those guys got their insurance premiums paid up. Very dangerous scenario. The guys, and a lot of respect for the guys who want to sign up and take this opportunity, because I'm certainly not forcing anybody to do so. But there are several men lined up who are begging to be in it. So going to have some announcements coming up. Actually, next week at Empire Wrestling, when we return in 7 days to the Empire Arena. That will be on January the 23rd. We look to make some more official match announcements for Long Cold Winter based on the events of Battle Bowl. Looking like Gunnar Miller and Rush could be headed on a collision course to Long Cold Winter, facing off against one another. They ended up drawing each other as random tag team partners against the team of Tank and Strychnine, of all people. So Tank and Strychnine just beat the hell out of each other from the word go, based on Strychnine attacking Tank and choking him out. I hate to see the former reject, colliding with my current charge. That really sucks. I'm glad to see Strychnine in there, but he's not going to get any special favors from me. Not the way he's behaved and aligning himself with the White Rose, who's directly opposed to us. I'm not really sure what I did to him. I don't know if he feels like I abandoned him in Cornelia after they won the titles and then Azrael turned on him. I'm not sure what happened there, but he's hell-bent for leather here at Empire Wrestling, and he choked out Tank, left him laying in the middle of the ring. Upon his debut, he F5'd a 380-pound Tank in the middle of the ring. He's got a clear issue, and he's essentially the muscle for the White Rose, their enforcer, and that issue is also heating up, and I'd say there's probably going to be something happening between those two at Long Cold Winter if things keep going the way they are. I'd say an official announcement is coming next week on all of that and the details that will follow for what's going to be a hell of a card. So join us, Empire Arena. Follow us on Twitter, EmpireWrestling.net. Follow us online. Go to the website, EmpireWrestling.net, on Twitter at EmpirePW, and on Facebook at Empire Wrestling. Also got a few other upcoming appearances. On February the 27th, we'll be returning to Cornelia, Georgia, the Church of Southern Wrestling, for Why We Wrestle. Hate that we had to cancel the first show. Tank suffered an injury. I said I would talk about it when I could. Danny Only, the commissioner of Why We Wrestle down there, he explained to the people there was an injury that happened the night before the card. Essentially, we thought everything was good to go. We were packing up and getting ready, and there were some real issues there. And Tank is the type of guy. He's one of the guys that's like, give me super glue, give me tape, and let's go. He does so. He was severely in pain, and luckily he's seen the doctor. It was a minor thing. He got a nice adjustment. He was back in the ring for Battle Bowl and seems to be doing fine. So everything looks great for the return on February 27th. Why We Wrestle, Cornelia, Georgia, the second round of their heavyweight championship tournament. Tank's going to be taking on Jeter. Talk about a clash of the titans. Almost half a ton in there going toe-to-toe and doing battle. And hope they put extra reinforcements on the ring for that one, because they're going to need it. And Tank is looking to prove that he's not there as a nostalgia act. He's not there as a guy who is coming just to make a guest appearance, that he's looking to go all the way in that tournament and take the title. And to defeat Jeter certainly would cement that. So very excited to be back there. Follow them online, facebook.com/anarchycornelia, and on Twitter at Why Do You Wrestle. I also have heard from the grapevine that whywewrestle.com is coming very soon. An announcement will be made on the social media as soon as that is available. Also be appearing at New South Wrestling on March the 12th. It's a Saturday night, 8 p.m. bell time, Hartselle, Alabama. The event is called We Love Wrestling. And you can find them online on Twitter at newsouth_PW, on facebook.com/New South Pro Wrestling. Going to be a big event. The Strong South Psycho Tank is coming back, and he is looking for Dump Sanders. As I said the last time he debuted, he destroyed Jeremy Foster. He put up a good fight, but Tank is looking for the biggest and the baddest there. And so we surveyed the card and we saw this guy, Dump Sanders, who I don't understand why the people love him. He's some kind of garbage man or a dump truck driver. I'm not sure why he's moonlighting in professional wrestling, but he's here. And the people love him, and he certainly showed himself to be a big bad hoss. But you ain't never seen anything like the strong style Psycho Tank. You have not been through the hell that he has walked. You have not experienced the miles traveled in his boots and the blood that he has shed for this sport. So Dump, we're coming for you. Get on the treadmill, fat boy. March the 12th, Hartselle, Alabama. Why we New South Pro Wrestling. Also, on that card, John Wayne Murdoch of IWA Mid-South fame, going to be taking on a guy who's got a lot of buzz around him, the strongman Peter Casa. Also, AR Fox and Team IOU will be debuting on that card. So in addition to the massacre of Tank getting a hold of whoever they throw at him, like I said, we're coming for Dump Sanders, but I have a feeling he's not going to be so willing to jump up for the fight just yet, just between you and me. But a lot of stars on that show. Going to be a big night for New South Wrestling, Hartselle, Alabama. So, real quick, going to do the Revs rant. Going to bring that back since there's not two old men to do old man haters before we kick it to the featured segment. And it's going to be a brief rant, but I see a thing on the social media that I don't really care for. And it seems that all the way up the ladder in a lot of cases, there's a lot of guys in the business today that have no ability to take constructive criticism. If it's a fan commenting on you, you really don't even have to respond unless they have a valid point, because, you should be worried about doing it. I mean, you should read what they say and take it to heart because they are your paying customers. But they don't necessarily know the ins and the outs enough to coach you or guide you on why they didn't like it, other than they knew they didn't. So, you need to look at that feedback, but don't take it to heart. Don't let it upset you because they don't have the educated opinion of a performer. But when one of your peers, especially anyone who's been around and is respected by anybody of note, they've got something to say, maybe you should take a little bit of that to heart instead of getting all upset about it. I was a young man once. I understand there was a time in my life when people criticized what you did. You took it as some kind of personal attack. I think it's just immaturity to a degree, but it's a very important building block of what we do and what we've done is that the previous generation passes down what they have learned to the younger generation. And a lot of time that is in the form of constructive criticism, razzing them a little bit, if you will. And it's not mean-spirited, I don't think. I don't think it's like trying to cost anybody money because, that is unprofessional. You don't want to just bury guys and try to cost your fellow workers money. Guys in the business that, they're working alongside you. You got to trust them to take care of your body, and you got to take care of them. And, everybody works together and nobody really makes the money. So it's not anything about that. But you really need to take the constructive criticism of a prior generation to heart without getting offended by it. If they call you a dumb fuck piece of shit, and, there's probably a reason to take a little bit of offense to that. But even so, maybe there's some truth in what they're telling you. So, I've just seen a lot of people on the social media getting upset about constructive criticism and saying, if you bury guys, we'll make sure you don't ever work anywhere. And it's like, maybe, yes, there's a side to that coin that's correct. Yes, don't do that. Don't cost your fellow pros money. But also, like, just because somebody said your match was the shits, doesn't mean that they're saying you're the shits, and they probably will help you, especially if it's a veteran wrestler. So, just my opinion. Take it for what it's worth. But that's all for the intro spot here tonight. We'll be back right after this commercial break with playing favorites. We're looking at the duds of professional wrestling. Don't go anywhere.
Whether you're having an autograph session, personal appearance, or live event, we got just the person you need to contact for all of those needs. SBI Bookings is home of some of the best stars in the wrestling industry today. They provide you with the best talent this business has to offer, from Kevin Nash, Larry Zbyszko, Scott Steiner, and many, many more. So who will you contact next time you're planning an event? The men of SBI Bookings. Check them out at sbibookings.com.
And we're back on the Midnight Black Mass, and welcome to another edition of Playing Favorites, where we discuss the best and the worst sometimes in professional wrestling. And tonight, the worst is what's on tap, because tonight's Playing Favorites, oh yes, we're featuring the duds. So when we say something is Dudley, we're not referring to Bubba Ray or Devon or even Dances with Dudley or Sign Guy or Spike or Chubby Dudley or any of them other Dudleys. No, we're talking about disappointments in professional wrestling. Of course, Andrew Alexander joining us here. What defines a dud to you, my friend?
Or a promoter or promotions, an opportunity that they missed, just something that they had in their hands and that they just did not make the money that it should have made or had the fanfare that it should have had. There's a lot of different ways you can look at it, but I think people, if you don't understand what we're talking about by the time we get into the list, I think you'll pick up what we're throwing down.
Oh, yeah. And because I don't have any great attachment to these duds, I think anything that comes up in yours, just to have bountiful discussion, I've got a huge list of duds, so we'll just pepper those in there to make sure we got plenty to talk about. So, going to do top five, and so what did you have listed there at number 5, old co-host, buddy, old pal?
I didn't. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff I missed out on or that I could have picked. Number 5, it's not something that cost them a lot of money or anything, but I just remember for being a fan watching it and it being kind of one of the first times. I mean, not really one of the first times. One of the first big times where you're like, they set something up during the Monday Night War, and you're just like, Jesus Christ, that sucked. And it was just so stupid and just really didn't make sense with how they built it up and everything. But my number 5 pick is the reveal of the higher power, which turned out to be Vincent Kennedy McMahon after several weeks, maybe even months, of himself feuding with the likes of The Undertaker and the Ministry and things such as that, and then the higher power was revealed to be him. I just think it was a huge dud and a huge letdown.
Oh yeah, there was so many rumors at the time when that happened, like who's it gonna be, and you know they really didn't. They definitely swerved everybody. That was one of the original Russo swerves, I believe. Because, you know, nobody expected to be Vince McMahon because he was already in a program and had just come off a run as the top heel working against Steve Austin. So they were feuding with The Undertaker, and then, of course, he just joins him. But, I mean, it was rumored it was going to be like Ted DiBiase or Jake the Snake or fucking Kevin Sullivan. Like, I mean, rumors were running wild of who this higher power might be that had control over The Undertaker. And it was Vince McMahon, like the most obvious answer. So, yeah, I would agree with that one for sure.
Yeah, it was just very anticlimactic for the angle and the time. And, yeah, I remember all of those names you just mentioned. I also remember the likes of King Curtis Iakea and just a lot of different people that were names were thrown out, and then it just turned out to be Vince again. So kind of a dud, but I have it there at number 5. What about you?
My number 5 dud would be the transition in 1995 of Shane Douglas, who, let me paint a little picture for you. At the time, ECW was just reaching its early popularity, and the guys who were on top there were the hottest guys in the business. Shane Douglas being no exception. He was the top heel in ECW. He was the rawest, edgiest, heat-getting heel in the business, and he could work. And that was the whole goal of Paul Heyman, to show that he was the modern classic professional wrestler. They had him work programs with guys like Tully Blanchard and go out there and go an hour with him and beat Tully. You know, he was worked Terry Funk and so many other guys. And so, you know, Shane Douglas couldn't have more momentum. And, of course, like many guys from the ECW at that time, he leaves and he goes and signs with the WWF. And lots of excitement, lots of buzz surrounding his debut. And he debuts not as Shane Douglas, not as the franchise, not as anything closely or remotely resembling that. No, folks, he is a high school principal. He is the Dean Douglas in one of the biggest eggs that was ever laid. And you got to feel bad for the guy. You know, he tried at some level to get it over, but, you know, there was no getting that over. So, unfortunately, the Dean died a horrible death. And he was back in ECW and regained most of his momentum over time. But unfortunately, what would have happened if he didn't make that jump at the time and would have jumped later when he had a little more leverage? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a very good pick. I think a lot of that was timing. They were still very much in that cartoon era, and also the era of just where so many characters were reality-based, like jobs. Like, you couldn't be a professional wrestler. You had to be a race car driver or a trash man or a teacher, things such as that. That was, in wrestling, was like your hobby or something. If he could have came in maybe just a year, definitely, with maybe 2 years later, could have been a completely different situation. But I think he did a good job with it. I wouldn't say it's the worst character they had. I mean, it had heat. It was very, very annoying, and he did well with it. But it just was not what it could have been, especially in that time period, because he was so hot there in the mid 90s and onto the late 90s. They could have got a little more out of him. So definitely an understandable pick there.
Hell yeah. They do that with a lot of guys. I don't know if I'll bring them up because they probably could come up on the list. So I guess we'll just move on to your number 4. What did you have?
My number 3 and number 4 are iffy. The reason I'm putting number 4 at 4 instead of 3 is because I think it was a big dud and it was a big dropping of the ball per se. But I don't think it would have changed a whole lot. I think the progression of professional wrestling still would have happened because the guy was just so unwilling to move forward. So my number 4 is Vern Gagne had Hulk Hogan and Hulkamania in the palm of his hand. He had it before Vince ever had it, before WrestleMania, before the Iron Sheik, before Madison Square Garden. He had Hulkamania running wild, and he just let it slip through his fingers.
Yeah, that definitely, and it wasn't just Hulkamania. I mean, you're talking about Heenan and Okerlund and, a good portion of the crew that became major stars there.
Yeah, definitely, but like Hulk Hogan, he didn't want Hulk Hogan to appear in the Rocky film, which is ridiculous. To not want your top guy to be in a huge major motion picture, and then they just didn't pull the trigger on putting the AWA World Title on Hogan, and they just, and the Hulkamania, the merchandise and everything that Vince did with him, Vern Gagne had the ability to do, and he just didn't do it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Poor Vern, he was just out of touch. He just didn't quite understand what he had, I don't think. And, it was unheard of at that time. A movie? What the fuck is wrong with you? What do you want to do a fucking movie for? You're a wrestler. Vince more forward thinking in that respect. It always has been. So no surprise that he ended up getting Hogan and giving him exactly what he wanted.
Yeah, and I mean, and like I said, I think even if Vern smartened up on that one piece of business, a lot of guys could have done what Vince did ultimately, but they just weren't willing to and just didn't see the different avenues with cable television and going worldwide and nationwide. So I think things would have still happened the way they are. Otherwise, I would have had that higher on the list for sure because, I mean, Hulk Hogan was, if not the biggest star of all time, the top 2 or 3. So pretty big deal there.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of Hogan, number 4 for me would involve the Hulkster, and unfortunately another of my favorites of all time, the Nature Boy Ric Flair. And it kind of goes back to 1992 when they debuted in WWF, or when Flair debuted, and Hogan was already the established, the incumbent, as Jim Ross would say, there as the top guy. And, Flair came in with a ton of heat as the heel, and clearly they were going in the direction of Hogan versus Flair and something, depending on what story you believe, whether it was attendance, whether it was politics, whether it was what have you. The match didn't happen. It happened on the house show loop, but it never happened on pay-per-view television, anything with any kind of build where they're going to try to sell tickets and build it as the major marquee dream match that everybody wanted to see. And then would have been the time to do it. They were both in their absolute prime. Neither had started really showing signs of slowing down at that point. but those years were coming pretty soon. And so later, Flair had left. He went back to WCW, and Hogan, of course, left WWF in a hugely controversial move at the time, and was allegedly gone to go film movies. But little did Vince McMahon know he was secretly negotiating with Eric Bischoff, and ended up joining WCW. So that was a huge deal at the time. You know, Hogan going to WCW changed the entire landscape of the company. They went from a very wrestling-based promotion, as they'd always been, to very much like for the space of those early couple of years, was very much a retread of 80s WWF angles that worked because, you know, it's the Hogan style, and they were just feeding him the successful formula, and it worked for them. It bumped up their business tremendously. But, you know, the first 2 or 3 years there, we got the Hogan versus Flair feud that they never gave us in WWF. Unfortunately, Flair was made to look like a total bitch in the way it was booked. I mean, Flair, you know, to his credit, working his ass off in there for Hogan, of course, like, you know, making him look like $1 million every night because he's the consummate professional. But, you know, they had a 3-match series, I believe, and instead of doing you know, it's not like anybody's expecting Flair to beat Hogan clean, but, you know, you could have fucked him out of a match. There's some things you could have done that weren't going to hurt Hogan to get a little steam on that. And then they had the big cage match, you know, retirement, loser leaves the business match. And that was supposed to be the blow-off. Well, hell, Hogan beat him clean in the other 2 fucking matches. So he just beat Flair like a drum 3 times. And, you know, I don't think that's what people were wanting to see by the time that match rolled around. And they were still good matches. But, again, you know, like I mentioned about them not doing the thing in 92, it's like they were just a couple years down the road, and they still were the fucking men by many stretches, but they had lost a little tiny step. So, yeah, I have to put that up there.
So what exactly are you considering the flop? The fact that the WWF didn't do it, or the fact that WCW did it but didn't do it well?
The whole timeline. Okay. Because had WWF done it in 92, like, who knows if we'd have even seen it happen in 94. But because they didn't do it, we got them a couple years later, a couple years past their prime, and without the careful, creative eye of Vince McMahon, who is, you know, especially in those days when he was more hands-on the product, very much a quality control genius. Like, he wasn't going to let any shit go by that was going to make anybody look bad. So if they're going to do 3-match series in the Fed, then there was going to be some intriguing finishes, and there was going to be some build-up and some heat and some steam. And then when Hogan got the big win, it was going to mean something. But in WCW, of course, Bischoff's now in charge. He's got an agenda against Flair, and Hogan is kind of calling his own shots. So instead of doing the competitive feud between the 2 legends that everybody wants to see, they just have Hogan come in and dominate the guy who's been on top there for the last 20 years.
Yeah, he dominated quite a bit. I mean, even with going forward with Vader and things such as that. But, you know, I think, and we've talked about this a little bit before, there's always been speculation as to why they didn't have the match at WrestleMania 8, and I've heard things about the matches just weren't that good, or they weren't drawing well on the house shows. Something I've never heard, but it's what I believe, just looking at the way things are kind of done, and I just think that Flair was the champion. You're going to have Flair defend the title against Hogan, which clearly this would be Hogan walking out the championship, but Hogan was leaving to take time off to do movies he was gone pretty much for a whole year with 1 or 2 appearances on Raw before WrestleMania 9. So he's gone pretty much a year, so you have Hogan leaving, and Hogan was just so well protected that you weren't going to have Hogan come in and just put over Flair, even on the way out, with him being the heel. They had done some things where Hogan put over some people, you know, the Warrior and Undertaker, but I just don't think you're going to have the main event of WrestleMania have the heel walk out with the title. So I think that's why they switched it. You had Hogan work with somebody, Sid, which they ended up doing a DQ finish, but still the crowd went home happy. You have Hogan and the returning Warrior posing and the whole 9, and then Flair dropped the belt to Savage, someone who was sticking around. So that's my opinion. That's why I think they didn't do it, because it just didn't make sense to do, and I really don't blame them. But, yeah, I think it cost them some big money in the long run.
Yeah, I think so. So what did you have down at number 3?
Number 3, a big angle that a lot of people give a lot of shit. I mean, I don't think it was as horrible when it was happening because you're very excited and you're falling into this stuff and you're not overthinking it. But when it's over, you definitely are thinking, wait a minute, what the fuck did I just spend months watching? And that is the WCW/ECW invasion of the then WWF in 2001.
Oh God, yeah. Is it the biggest flop ever, possibly? I mean, like in retrospect, when you think, like, go back and just put yourself in the position of a fan at that time, which you were. I mean, starting to break into the business, I think, but I was already in the business for a year or two at that point. But still watching, still a fan, and I think that's kind of the moment that really is like, and I don't know that I've ever had that love for just being a pure wrestling fan without having that jaded insider who's been in the business for 20 years, like at least somewhere in a small voice in the back of my mind. I can quieten him down most of the time, but he's always there, and it kind of traces back to that angle. Because think about it. I mean, the biggest other company had closed, and just a few years before this, they were one of the biggest things in the world. Like WCW had overtaken WWF in popularity. They were hugely successful. And then so WWF buys them out. And the big angle that we've all wanted to see since we're small children is going to happen, right? The invasion is going to take place. We're finally going to see WCW come over. However, the problem is all of the top stars at WCW were making several $1 million to sit at home and do nothing. And WWF didn't want to cough up the money to buy out the contracts for the short term to get the long-term gain. And so when the invasion happens, it's a bunch of great talents, but nobody who was ever considered a superstar by WCW, except for maybe like DDP and your Booker T's of the world, who was a late in the run star, and DDP was treated like a joke. And so it was just, oh God, it was horrible.
Yeah, there was, one way you can look at it is, they should have had WCW be its own separate show, but they wouldn't have done that. But fast forward just over a year later, and that's exactly what they did. They did a brand split, and they had Raw as its own show and SmackDown as its own show. So they could have done that. And then you look and say, okay, well, they didn't have any WCW stars. Well, if they'd have waited a year, just a year, and I don't think you could have done something to keep that alive, but I don't think people would have just forgotten about WCW in a year's time. When you look at the next, 18 months, like the night after the invasion angle ended, they got Flair. Then they got, about a year after that, they got Scott Steiner. 6 months after that, they got the NWO, Hall, Hogan, Nash. A little before that, they got Rey Mysterio. I'm forgetting people, but they literally got they got Goldberg a little bit later. That was a couple of years later, but still, they got Goldberg. They got
Dusty, who wasn't an in-ring guy, but was the heart and soul of WCW for many years.
Yeah, the point is basically every WCW star and every top WCW star, with the exception of Sting, was there within 2 years. So if you put the brakes on it and be patient. Or something, or maybe just bring these guys in we're just like an NWO-esque type thing where you have these undercard talents that are still great talents. You got Lance Storm, and you got a lot of cruiserweights, and you got a lot of the young guys with the Chuck Palombos and the Mark Jindrak, Sean O'Hare's. You got a lot of these guys. Well, have them come in we just want a chance. We want an opportunity at the big league. So we're here, and then boom, a year later, they bring in the big guns, and they started an invasion then. Just a lot of different ways you could have done it. And they didn't put any faith in WCW's talent because basically all they did was water them down with, like the ECW invasion, it was all guys they had under contract with the exception of Dreamer and Van Dam. And then they added Austin, their biggest star, to the WCW side, which in reality was stupid. Just didn't make a lot of sense, and I just don't know if it wasn't the best move to make. And they did all this shit with Angle was against them, and he was red hot, and then he was with them, and then Vince McMahon sent him in as a spy. It got silly, and it was just it could have been one of the biggest things of all time. It was the angle that wrestling fans had wanted to see for the last 10 years, and it just did not work out.
No. I mean, it was just it was the biggest letdown. I mean, it probably, like I said, in all honesty, would rank number one because you just like to see what was squandered there, and just fuck. Yeah, the goddamn invasion. That was some shit.
So what's your number 3?
My number 3 is the Eliminators, a tag team, great tag team in the ECW era. But the thing was, these guys were primed to go on to huge stardom elsewhere. And Perry Saturn did. I mean, he had a pretty damn good career thereafter for a while. He was a pretty big star at WCW. Left with the Benoit and Guerrero and crew and had a decent run in WWF. And, now he's retired out of the business. I think he's still out doing some shows and stuff. I worked a show with him at a fan convention once. He's like got tattoos all over his fucking face and shit. He's really awesome looking. But like his partner John Cronus just kind of fell off the face of the earth. He wrestled in XPW for a little while after ECW closed down. I'm not sure what happened with those guys or why they split up, but for a few years there, I mean, they were the premier tag team in the business. And they were so fucking tag team minded. Like they, so many double teams and like everything was about the unit. And I just really, that was one of those teams I really thought was going to like break out and change tag team wrestling. I thought those guys were going to bring like the classic tag team style back. I thought they were going to go to WWF and go straight to the top. And it didn't happen. So I just, not a dud per se because both those guys had decent careers, but I just wonder what could have been.
Yeah, that's a very interesting pick. And, in the past couple of months, I went through and I watched all the WCW pay-per-views start to finish. And that Perry Saturn, man, he was delivering some badass matches, especially for the time.
He was good.
I mean, there was many shows on there, man. He might have had the best match on the card. And he was doing a lot of stuff did some programs with Jericho, did a lot of that good stuff with Raven, Benoit, teaming with Benoit, working against Benoit, Malenko, a whole lot of good stuff. And I remember him having a lot of good matches in the WWE once he went, and then he just kind of floundered a little bit, I think, after said invasion angle. But yeah, that guy was a hell of a hand, and man, in his prime looked like $1 million. And then I know after he left ECW, which it's very, very, I found it odd that he left on his own and they didn't try to take Cronus with him as part of a package deal. But Cronus put on a considerable amount of weight, but could still do all of his high flying stuff, even with the added weight, which was kind of even more impressive. But yeah, they were a hell of a team. They'll be one of those teams that goes down as kind of maybe a most underrated or most, a biggest what if, like you said, because these guys could have had just a hell of a run on top of what they did. So yeah, that's a good pick.
Yeah, I was like, I love the Eliminators and just I wish they would have had more success together. Not that I wish that Perry Saturn didn't have any of his single success, because like you said, man, he was delivering the goods. He was really just underrated all around as a worker, I think. I mean, he'd go up and do the crazy high-flying shit. He was really solid technically. It was a great promo, but he was just one of those badasses that didn't really have to be a great promo, Like, people just believed that he was a tough motherfucker. Well, you can tell by looking at him.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what did you have?
So my number two, the reason it's not my number one is because my number one just was more than one night. It was just a long time of dud after dud after dud. And I'm a little partial, but I think people have to agree with me on my number one. But my number two, it was one night, but it was the night that WCW just slapped us all in the face because they had one of the greatest builds of all time for a match. They built up Sting and Hogan for like a year and a half solid. It was done well. Sting didn't compete in one single fucking match, but he was still the hottest thing on the roster. Hogan was a monster heel, reinvented himself, became the biggest heel in wrestling, They had everything going their way, everything. The match should have been so simple. If anything, if worst case scenario, you just have Sting go out there and beat the dog shit out of Hogan for 5 minutes and beat him. Like, no heat, no psychology, just have him whip his ass. But the psychology would have been easy. You have Sting clowning him around, you're bouncing him around like a pinball, maybe NWO's involved, some good heat, big fiery comeback, which we all know Sting can do. Boom, wins the WCW title, brings back prestige to the company. But no, they had to ruin this shit, and still to this day, I don't know why. I heard some cockamamie bullshit reason that Eric Bischoff gave him an interview about how they thought Sting looked out of shape and didn't think he'd be able to go, so they come up with all this horse shit at the end, which makes no sense at all. Because even the match itself, Hogan whipped Sting's ass the whole time. This isn't.
He just straight up jobs him out, man. He just fucking jobs him out. It's just like all Hogan, fucking big boot leg drop. Okay, you expect Sting's gonna make the Hogan come back here. That's what I thought they were gonna do. Like, oh well, Hogan just kicked his ass. He drops the big leg. Okay, well 1, 2, here comes the kick out, and Sting's gonna make a Hogan comeback. And now 1, 2, 3. That's the finish.
Just beats him right in the middle. And I'm all for babyface selling. But this was not the time. This was not the story that needs to be told with Sting selling this whole match. And they claim that Nick Patrick's supposed to do this 3 count. And I've never heard his side of I've heard things of, he forgot it was supposed to be a fast 3 count. What? You're telling me this official who's been refereeing for his whole fucking adult life, grew up in the business, he forgot to make a fast 3 count? No, it sounds like horse shit. Why would you do a fast count? Because they had done the NWO, he was the NWO referee. They had done that a year prior, and he had been kicked out and all that shit. This wasn't the time for swerves and all that shit. You had swerved for almost a year and a half solid at least. This is the time to just pay it off. This is where you get your pop. There should have been no horse shit. Fast count by Nick Patrick, even though there was no fast count. He rings for the bell. Bret Hart teleports. He magically appears ringside. Before the fast count even happens, he's already at ringside. He's like, oh, no, that was a fast count, brother. It ain't happening again. And he nails him. He's an official for the night. And so he gets in there and he calls for the match is restarted. Sting puts the scorpion on, he wins. It was just such horse shit. I don't understand how anyone could have overbooked that to that degree. It was simple. Sting beats Hogan. That's it. I can't even imagine Hogan. He had put Luger over 3 months earlier to that, clean as a whistle on Nitro. I can't even imagine him pulling the Hogan card and the creative control and not wanting to do the job. None of it makes sense. None of it.
Oh yeah, that was the moment WCW started losing their momentum. They were winning in the ratings. They were the number 1 company at the time. And after that failure to deliver and a few other following failures to deliver on important things, people started losing their confidence. And they got Goldberg, and they had that huge run after that. They had him basically vanquish the NWO again. The NWO never disappeared, and that's one thing that hurt them and got them convoluted, besides adding every fucking roster member under the sun and having a NWO red and white and a black and white and the fucking Latino World Order and fucking all these other different factions, But Sting should have beat him, and they should have disappeared for a few weeks to regroup, come back and fucked him up, and then you can keep Hogan away and get the heat and build the NWO's heat back up for Goldberg. But that's not what happened. And like I said, it was the first nail. Even though it was right in the middle of their hottest time, I think it was the first sign that WCW was not going to be able to manage the success that they had.
And all they ended up doing, if you recall, was a short weeks later on the first episode of Thunder, they stripped Sting of the title, waited all the way another month and a half till Super Brawl to have a rematch where the undisputed champion would be crowned, and Sting won again. It was all horse shit. It was all pointless. It was I don't know, maybe they thought, well, if we do this, we can sucker people's money back out of them for the rematch. And I think you could have just had the rematch. And back then, man, wrestling was so hot, you didn't have to try to sucker people's money. People will just give me the money. It was the worst. It's the worst single single thing in the history of wrestling, I think. Single moment.
Yeah, I gotta think somebody was sabotaged there at some level. Like I just don't think they fucked it up that bad accidentally.
Yeah, and you can't blame Russo on that one because he was still up north.
Yeah, I don't know. So, well, my number 2 would be you have a situation where you have one of the top stars ever in the rival promotion in the WCW. Despite what many smart fans may say about his work rate, he was a star, he was a draw, and people paid to see him, and I'm talking about Lex Luger. In 1992, he was as big a superstar as WCW had. He left the company, got in a motorcycle accident and fucked himself up, which delayed his debut into the WWF. And there's also rumors that, the steroid trial was going on then, so they didn't really want Lex showing up right in the middle of that. And so they had him debut with the World Bodybuilding Federation, which is a big fucking dud in and of itself. It probably has its own wing of the Dud Museum Hall of Fame. So Lex debuts in the WWF as the Narcissus, finally, some 2 years later after he signed, or like a year and a half later. And debuts under the tutelage of Bobby Heenan. So, you think, well, it's dumb that they're giving him a fucking gimmick, but, at least he's Lex. At first, they weren't even going to call him Lex Luger. He was just going to be the Narcissus. And then people were like, that's fucking Lex Luger, you asshole. Come on. We just saw him as the world champion on the other fucking show. You'd think you would be happy to have the competition's world champion. But so he shows up, has a fairly lackluster run in his early going as the Narcissus. Does redeem himself somewhat as Made in the USA. He was working really hard during that time. I even saw him have a good match with Kevin Nash during that time period. They had a 30-minute match on a fucking home video that was pretty good. I was like, oh, shit. But, he just never lived up to potential as far as being one of the top stars of WCW. Was it because they sabotaged him? Was it because he couldn't fulfill his end of the deal? It's probably a little bit of both.
Okay, so you're just saying his Fed run was the dud here.
Yeah, overall, if you're looking at it as a whole picture, it has to rank in the dud category because there's a guy that by all accounts should have been bigger than he was and shouldn't have had to be repackaged 3 times before they struck a hit with him.
Well, he was a total package, so he had many packages left in him.
Apparently.
I don't know if I would agree with that, but I see what you're saying because he was a huge star at WCW and then went back and became even a bigger star for a long time. And for the time frame, the WWF didn't have a lot of star power. They just didn't. So it is kind of unique and kind of a mystery why he didn't get quite to a bigger plateau just as far as being a world champion and maybe having a bit of a longer run. I think the reason he didn't get the title at WrestleMania 10 was just simply he didn't get as over as Bret Hart was, which, obviously Bret Hart had been there for years, so he had an advantage, but I just don't think that you would have had to kill off his run and drop him down on the card as much as they did over that next year and a half that he was there. But I don't know if I would say it was a dud, but I definitely see your point there.
Fair enough. Well, what about...
And they tried so hard to make him just Hulk Hogan Part 2. They just really tried to create a lot of that and make him kind of a clone, which isn't fair, which wouldn't be fair to anyone.
Oh, no. Like I said, he got some momentum as Made in the USA. I think people wanted to see him beat Yokozuna at SummerSlam that year. They shot the big angle with him on the boat where he was the first guy to body slam Yokozuna. And, that was instantly got him over as a babyface. There's some good booking in there overall, but, like I said, I don't understand why he had to go through so many repackages before they decided clearly this guy's a star. Why didn't you just treat him like he was... They treat him like he was a star, but I don't know. It just didn't meet the expectations I had as a fan at the time.
Yeah, they just wanted to put their thumbprint on him, but they do that a lot, so especially back then. But my number 1, I dare anyone to just, it may not be your number 1, but no one can dispute that everything I'm about to say is cold, hard fact. How the motherfuck are you going to have the biggest thing to ever happen in professional wrestling in November of 1997? It literally changed everything about the business in one night. The Montreal Screwjob. The Montreal Screwjob ends. WCW signs the biggest thing in wrestling at that moment. One of the biggest stars, and especially the WWF's biggest star, their competition, the biggest star they had, Bret Hart, the world champion. They sign him. This happens, the Montreal Screwjob, the biggest thing ever. And then you keep him off TV for like almost over a month. Then he comes in. You don't even give him matches. You make him a referee in a stupid match with Eric Bischoff and Larry Zbyszko. Then he just does nothing for like borderline his whole run there. He's against the NWO. He's against Hogan. He wants a match with Hogan. And then he's friends with Hogan, but he's not even in the NWO. He's an associate of the NWO, probably because he was like, I ain't wearing one of those fucking T-shirts. And then he's hanging out with Hogan, and you can't even keep up with the shit. They misused this guy so unbelievably bad, it's laughable. And they were paying him like $3 million a year. They just flushed $3 million a year down the toilet and had one of the biggest stars of all time and did shit with him coming off of the biggest thing in wrestling. How does that happen?
Yeah, that's a good fucking question. I don't know. It's hard to argue that that's not the biggest fucking dud ever. Is how they use them. I'd say they probably have to rank as my number one too. But I'll throw something else out there just to vary up the discussion. But goddamn, yeah, hard to top that. But between that and the Invasion, like I don't know what were two bigger money lost opportunities, but those were two of the biggest ones ever.
Well, WCW spent $9 million on Bret Hart. So they lost $9 million. They didn't make hardly any of that back from him because they didn't do shit with him. And this wasn't a one-night or a one-month thing. This was like 2 years solid of just horse shit. So what's your number one? Please, somebody dispute what I just said. I dare you to try. But what's your number one?
No, I'm not going to dispute that. I will give you that. My rankings were fairly arbitrary because a lot of it was there were things on there that you picked that I had on there that I purposely moved out, and the number one was one of them. So I will just throw in a couple little tidbits, but gonna have to say, as far as disappointments go, gotta say Vader's run in the WWF. Like, again,
that's big.
Yeah, again, you take a guy who was the biggest killer. And then, they had taken a little steam off of him by having Hogan squash him and having fucking him turn babyface before he left. But there was not a more vicious killer in the business at the time. And he shows up in the WWF, and he's featured briefly upon his arrival. And I don't know if it was just that he didn't work WWF style. A lot of people said Shawn Michaels buried him. And so, after he had the big match with Shawn Michaels at SummerSlam, which he made Shawn Michaels look like fucking Superman. I mean, he hit him with everything in the fucking kitchen sink at 400-something pounds, and Shawn Michaels at 210 is fucking kicking out a goddamn moonsault off the top and everything else. And fucking, but he just, that was a money-making opportunity that they squandered. And then within a year or two, he was on TV fucking crying, talking about he's a fat piece of shit. Like, is that how you book a fucking monster? Like, who the fuck came up with that shit?
Yeah, that was – I've always heard the rumors that he was supposed to win the title from Michaels at the Survivor Series to drop it back to him at the Royal Rumble, which is, exactly what they did with Sid, but they went with Sid in that position instead. Yeah, I don't understand it. I mean, he came in hot, did some really good stuff, was having good matches with people, good matches with Undertaker, which he had a couple more of those in '97, but good match with Michaels, just had good heat, Cornette with him, everything was going well. And, I don't know, it seems like maybe Michaels put the kibosh on that, or somebody that had Vince's ear. Just doesn't make a lot of sense. And they were always very hesitant to get behind stars that they didn't create. That was always a thing. It's always been there. Some guys have rose above it, your Jerichos, your Benoits, your Guerreros, but it took a long, long time, almost to the point where they just rebranded them and remade them superstars in the fans' eyes. And Vader just really never got that opportunity because he was the backbone as far as the heels concerned in WCW for that whole early 90s to mid-90s run.
Yeah, and he was new and fresh, and he was a different kind of monster, and I don't understand how they didn't see that, or it didn't come to pass, or if maybe it wasn't safe, I don't know. But regardless, that's what happened. And, folks, we're out of time this week on the Midnight Black Mass, but another great edition of Playing Favorites. Join us right back here next week on the Potty Humor Network. Keep one foot in the gutter and one fist in the gold. Andrew Alexander, thank you for joining us. We're out.
This has been a production of the Potty Humor Network. Find us online at youtube.com/pottyhumor or subscribe to us weekly and never miss an episode by searching Potty Humor on iTunes or Stitcher. Thank you for listening and good night.